Disability Radio Worldwide, every Sunday here on KGNU Boulder, with Jean Parker. Community educational outreach needs volunteers to tutor adults in reading, writing, math, job, family, and life skills. CEO is a nonprofit group helping educationally disadvantaged adults who live in transitional housing in Denver and Boulder. Call Marcy at 447-3353 for more information. Coming up next is Antithesis, a show hosted by Leo and Richard. They will give insightful conversation and talk about issues that concern you. And at 6 o'clock, the BBC News will be on. And at 7 o'clock, Eclipse, the latest in hip-hop music and news with Chris Nathan and his crew. Stay tuned to KGNU Boulder.
Good afternoon and welcome to Antithesis.
Antithesis is a weekly radio soiree of stimulating commentary and entertaining conversation discussing issues of importance in our daily lives.
Antithesis airs Sunday afternoon at 5:30.
I'm Richard Curtis.
I'm Leo Griep-Ruiz.
The opinions expressed on Antithesis are the opinions of the person speaking them,
and do not necessarily represent the views of the board, staff, or management of KGNU or of us here at Antithesis.
because I might not agree with him.
And I might not agree with him.
Hemp and the drug war. The legislature in Colorado has backed down, again, on a chance to do something good. Does this surprise you? Many people thought this would be the year that the legislature would allow small farmers to grow hemp. The only thing at stake is the future of the planet, but the fools decided it's more important to keep locking most of us up than to preserve the environment and the family farm. It's easy to just say that the legislators and police are a bunch of evil jerks, but what would that accomplish? And is it really true? The news always gets reported that the police claim that farmers growing hemp would mean an increase in the illicit cultivation of its cousin, marijuana. The police make money when they follow irrational social policies like locking everyone up rather than growing environmentally sound alternative fibers. Sure, the legislators are fools. At least many of them are, because they're sacrificing our future to the so-called war on drugs. And the real force behind the drug war is not the police. The police are just stupid enough to support the continued illegality of hemp and to be public about it. The real interests behind keeping alternative fibers off the market are those interests which produce the products that would have to compete with hemp. Hemp is the most useful plant in the world. It can be grown in a short time. In Colorado, some have estimated it would be possible to produce up to 3 crops a year from one piece of land. Hemp can be used for nearly everything, really. Textiles of all kinds, food, fuel, paper, and more. The reason people think we should grow hemp is that hemp is an environmentally sound alternative to plastics and wood products. The use and production of petroleum and its derivatives is destroying the environment. The harvesting and use of wood products is not only unsightly, it's also destroying our environment. So who wants us to keep using petroleum and wood? Really, really big corporations that thrive in a value system that sacrifices family farmers and the environment on the altar of private profits. But the drug war is more complicated than that. Sure, the drug war preserves the profits of forest product companies, but it's also a means of social control. The million nonviolent offenders in jail on petty drug charges are people that the economy cannot provide for. We don't have jobs, job training, or other social services for these people. Everyone has to be somewhere, and if the nonviolent offenders were on the street, they might be demanding jobs at decent wages. Further, the drug war serves as a support system for the alcohol and tobacco industries. If we decriminalized marijuana, for example, we would need a way of classifying it. Obviously, this would be done with mechanisms very similar to alcohol. But we wouldn't want slick TV ads or billboards trying to entice kids to take up pot smoking the way the alcohol and tobacco industries do with their products. And if we were going to decriminalize pot, but outlaw advertising it, then we would have to outlaw all advertising for beer and cigarettes as well. Advertising drugs is just not acceptable. If that's not enough, the drug war also allows the CIA to raise funds for its human rights abuses all over the world through the sale of heroin and cocaine. Despotic governments all over the world are propped up by the CIA and the sale of drugs. The growing of hemp is a direct challenge to the entire drug war mentality, and it is a direct challenge to the profit interests of Exxon, Dow Chemical, Philip Morris, and Georgia Pacific. Threatening the drug war is also a direct challenge to the CIA's covert action capabilities, not to mention the governments of Colombia and Peru. But the tide is turning. People are starting to realize that the drug war is more destructive than the drugs themselves. People are starting to realize that the future of our children and our children's children is more important than the profits of Dow Chemical. Someday, people will realize that there are just no good reasons for not growing a miracle plant like hemp to make our lives more comfortable and to protect the environment for the future. Someday, people will see that the purpose of the so-called war on drugs is to keep us down and to support someone else's profits, not to protect us. Hopefully, our society and environment will not have already been destroyed when this time comes. This is Richard Curtis.
So that's what you want to talk about this week?
Well, we gotta talk about something.
Pot?
Ooh, pot.
Well, I heard him say hemp.
Hemp too.
Well, gee whiz. We've got a guest in the studio.
A guest.
Yes, we do.
Hi.
Hi, Pam White from the Colorado Daily.
Pamela White, the managing editor of the Colorado Daily, the notorious Pamela White.
We're going upscale.
Well, what do you think of this? I mean, what you sure talked about a lot of stuff, Richard. I mean, you talked for a long time, too. Let's face it.
Well, 4 minutes.
That's a long time. This is radio.
Oh, yeah.
And we've got listeners out there, we hope.
Still.
You know, yeah, well, what we could hope is that they're all so stoned that they're still listening, right?
Probably don't realize I stopped.
Well, let's bring it down to the difference. First of all, there's certainly a significant difference between pot and hemp.
Well, there's that THC thing.
Yeah, the THC, which is the active alkaloid that gets people stoned on joints and doesn't get them stoned if they try to smoke rope.
There's no point smoking rope.
You'd have to smoke an awful lot of it, I think, to feel anything at all, and probably then you'd just feel sick.
Well, wasn't it back during the time of George Washington? Didn't Washington and Jefferson and those guys grow hemp?
Grow hemp, yeah, for ropes, for sales.
I've seen pictures of stuff in the National Geographic where they've done archaeological digs, and there's clothing from, I don't know, way back sometime long time ago, like long time ago, you know, that has survived until this time. It's certainly a strong fiber.
It was considered a patriotic thing to do at that time, to grow hemp, because it could be used by the Navy. Before the colony, became the United States, it was actually exported to Britain, and it was considered a patriotic crop.
During World War II and World War I as well.
You know, there's something I do want to, I got to take issue with you, Richard.
Ooh.
You were talking about the cops being stupid.
Foolish, I think.
You said stupid.
You
I
said
wrote
stupid.
It down. You said
Okay.
stupid. Yeah, I wrote it down.
Oh, nuts.
And I've taken a lot of heat for my comments on the heat in some of the columns that I've written in the Colorado Daily, where I have called abusive cops who violate the rights of others under color of their authority pigs. And I will continue to use that term whenever somebody uses the color of authority to abuse the rights of others. But in this case around hemp, I think that the cops are stuck over a barrel, because the cops got a job. Job is very clearly defined. A cop's job is supposed to be to enforce the law, period. And as long as the law is what it is, and as long as marijuana remains illegal, and as long as hemp is not genetically engineered so that its leaf does not resemble that which is smoked, the cops have got a serious, I think that they do have a legitimate problem in trying to differentiate between one and the other. And certainly it would draw, because you know, man, there's going to be high school kids running around with bushels full of agricultural THC-less hemp,
Selling it.
and throwing it up in the air in front of a police department somewhere for a prank. You know what I mean? There's going to be that kind of stuff going on.
That
And
too.
I think that we really got to look at the much deeper issue. And I would say that the deep issue that we're looking at here is, what is a drug? I know perfectly well that my cup of coffee contains more drug than most coffee sold on the market, and the drug that's in the coffee I make for myself in the morning is caffeine, and it's a drug.
Yeah, what about chocolate? I mean, not only does it have caffeine in it, but it also works as an aphrodisiac when it interacts with female hormones. They've written extensive literature about that, actually, in women's magazines. I'd say that's a drug.
See?
Sugar.
See?
Sugar is addicting.
No, actually, well, I want to come back to the police thing because I think that's important. The point I was actually making is that the police are wrong for going down to the state legislature and testifying against these bills. See, it's one thing to enforce the laws that they're given. It's another to lobby on behalf of maintaining ones that are clearly inappropriate, socially inappropriate. And I've written about that before, criticizing the Fraternal Order of Police which is, in essence, a police union for slaughtering its members in gang fights in the inner cities in pursuit of the drug war, which is...
Did you hear about the two cops that shot each other in L.A.? One of them killed the other one?
No.
This just happened, fairly recently. Two cops got into an argument, a traffic argument. Check it out. Two cops in L.A., one of them working a vice sting, and the other one undercover doing something else.
Right.
Some get into one of those, shout at each other. Obviously, neither of them knowing the other one was a cop. And since I came up in L.A., I can testify to the attitude that a lot of L.A. cops got. They must have had that "I'm a cop and you ain't" attitude at each other. And they wound up pulling guns and shooting each other, and one of them's dead. But that's not what we're talking about today. What we're talking about now is the appropriateness of
police lobbying
police
on behalf.
lobbying around laws.
And see, I think that's the counter to your argument. Of course police have to enforce the laws, that are on the books. That's their job. We expect them to do that. I think lobbying is clearly inappropriate, especially on something like this.
Well, I think they may not have some choice. I mean, they're essentially the bottom rung in a large corporation, which is U.S. law enforcement. And on the top of that, you have things like the FBI and the CIA and the cops on the bottom. He may not have a choice. He or she may be told, go down to the State House. I mean, when Lloyd Casey had his bill down there, who knows that those police officers actually did that voluntarily. It may have been in their job description.
Yeah, that's an interesting point.
And then, of course, we should also, another interesting sidelight to this, I think, is that the cops really are basically the farm hands, the field hands, in harvesting the crop, which is the strangest fruit of all. We who at one time were the motive force of production have become a product. And we're not even a product to be utilized. We become a product to be warehoused in what seems to be one of the very few growth industries in the state, which is the prisons.
Which was the other point I was making about putting people away because you don't have jobs for them.
It's crazy
causing trouble.
that people are getting put away for ridiculous amounts of drugs, and people who kill other human beings, like cut holes in their bodies with, edged weapons and stuff like that until they bleed to death, are doing less time.
Well, and the whole point here, I think, guys, really is that this is not a war on drugs. This is a war on some drugs. This is not a war on drugs. If it were, they'd come get my candy bar. They'd drag your caffeine out of your house. No more coffee for you. That's it. It would be different than it is. It's
It would
a
be
war
like
on
Utah.
some drugs. Yes, it would. It would be Utah.
Oh, man. It's a
That's
scary thought,
That's
isn't it?
really frightening.
Wow.
Well, actually, though, if it were like Utah, people who look down on the use of drugs would serve them to you. So I guess it is like Utah.
Well, yeah, it's getting scarier.
Well, I mean, we have a ridiculous loop going on here. It's illegal if you have it. They bust you. They take it from you. Then they go sell it to someone else in L.A., bust them, throw them in prison, hire more people to build the prisons and guard the prisons. And, I don't know exactly what their goal is, to throw all of us in prison or what. I mean, and, frankly, when we talk about hemp and everybody's saying, well, this is low THC and this is not bad, to heck with that. Let's just legalize not just pot. Let's legalize everything. I mean, this prohibition mindset doesn't work. All it does is create this kind of conflict. Let's legalize all of it. Legalize pot. Heck, I'll smoke it publicly. I don't have a problem with this.
Now in Holland, I understand that they even went so far as to legalize heroin.
Yeah.
And people were shooting up in the park. And for drug prevention campaigns, they would take youth in schools into the park and let them watch junkies fixing up.
That would be a sobering experience.
And I've thought, I've seen some statistics. I wish I had that stuff with me now, saying that drug use of those sorts has been going down. I think that one of the things that's happened with the criminalization of a lot of these drugs is the glamorization of a lot of these drugs. It's one thing to see somebody doing a line of cocaine at a party and looking cool because they're dressed up nice. It's something else to see somebody who's on the back end of a cocaine addiction acting like, a down-and-out crackhead on the street, or a serious down-and-out junkie, who's sick. And most people, because of the fact that everybody's driven underground, have never seen a sick junkie. Because they're still at the economic level and the social level, where the people they're dealing with are people who are at the entry or the maintenance level of that addiction, rather than being at the terminal end of that addiction. And in my life on the street, man, I've seen them out there, and I know how ugly a scene that can be. I know of a case about 2 years ago of a young woman who died from an infection that was caused by injecting herself in her eyeball. She had no veins left anywhere, and she was so desperate for a fix, she shot herself up in her own eyeball, and it got infected, and she died.
Oh, man.
And,
yeah, you want to keep kids off drugs, show them that.
Jeez.
Jeez.
Which is why I think the train spotting is one of the very best anti-drug messages I've ever seen. They manage to just show it like it is without over-glorifying it. If you didn't know anything about shooting up, you weren't really going to learn anything in watching that movie, but if you had ever been around that kind of a scene, and I'll be upfront and say that, well, I'm 50 now, so it was something like around 30 years ago or so, I was around a pretty heavy scene.
Mm-hmm.
And, man, I don't know any way that would be better for keeping our youth away from that stuff than letting them see what it is that really happens to people and see how people live when they get deep into that stuff.
Well, this is the thing we do in the U.S., though. We shelter people from reality. We shelter them from the realities surrounding sex. We shelter them from any truth about drugs. And as a result, we have a bunch of ignoramuses who really don't understand much of anything, except that they're supposed to be afraid of this and afraid of that, and this is wrong and that is wrong. They have no real understanding of the issues. And unfortunately, you were talking about the legislators being stupid. I'm not sure if stupid was the word you used, but unfortunately,
Foolish. That was foolish.
That was foolish. Well, they represent, still the perspectives of a majority of the people in this country. They didn't get there because the Klingons being moved from outer space. They were elected.
Well, elected by a minority of the population.
A minority of the population, but a majority
people
of
who vote,
voters.
yeah.
And one of the most influential lobbies is the liquor distributors' lobbies, man.
Well, see, that's the deeper point I was trying to make, is that the war on drugs has nothing to do with preventing kids from just trying drugs or using drugs. It has much deeper purposes, which have to do with protecting profits and
Corporate interest.
and also protecting the CIA.
What Pam just said right now, those two words, corporate interests, that's kind of a transition point into what I see as the second part of what you were talking about, which whatever happened to the concept of energy conservation? Remember energy conservation?
From the 70s.
Yeah, kind of like blow the dust off of it, like let's drag that one back out. Whatever happened to that?
I think oil prices came down.
Oil prices came down. People got sick of it. Besides, I think there was a gentler mindset back then. We all laugh at the 70s with bell bottoms and the Brady Bunch and that kind of thing. But there was there was much more, I think, social unity, much more of a peace mentality than you find nowadays, where the demographics have just splintered in part, I think, due to corporate marketing techniques and all sorts of different factors. But I think, back then people were much more open-minded to that sort of thing, much more progressive about energy conservation. But you're right, it probably had to do with what was in their wallets, because if anything gets the attention of America, and this is how you can tell them apart from anybody else on the planet, it's money. Wave money, you'll find the American.
Yeah, you can never tell, man. You
Leave
drag a
some money.
$100 bill through the United States of America. You never know what'll turn up. Or through the Congress. The issue of energy conservation is really a vital issue, especially if we consider the fact that, as you said, 3 crops can be grown with a tremendous harvest, not just of fiber, but of oil,
Oil from the seeds, yeah.
which can then be used as, and it's an eminently renewable fuel source.
And
We could-
protein source.
We could easily take all that nasty stuff that comes out of the, out of the open end of those pipes that leave our homes, and use that then to, instead of turning it into methane to run our vehicles, use that, compost that into fertilizer, grow hemp crops, use the fiber in so many different ways, not the least of which is for clothing, and use the oil that can be taken out of it for a fuel. It's an eminently, burnable fuel, and to say nothing of all of the other uses that it can be put to. But, gee, who would be threatened by...
That.
Who would be threatened by a source of non-synthetic fibers
Well,
and oil?
Dow Chemical.
Industry, yeah.
I-
Chemical industries, the petroleum industries.
Yeah, actually, the story goes that hemp was criminalized at the same time that Dow Chemical was figuring out ways of synthesizing plastics from petroleum.
And it was,
Those things happened at the same time.
yeah, it was also
Ironically enough.
decriminalized for a short period of time during World War II, and then they made it illegal
Well, this was
again.
the 50s.
Yeah, in the 50s.
But yeah, it was criminalized in the 30s, I think.
Yeah, in the 30s, and
after
then
World War I,
decriminalized, and then
For World War
criminalized
II,
again.
yeah.
So see, the thing is here is that, the government knows this. They know this. Everybody knows this. I mean, the only people who don't know this are the people who live with their heads up their rears, and I suppose there's a lot of them, but probably not in office, at least, who are ignorant of this fact. They know this, and they choose to ignore it. They choose to ignore it because there's money to be made in ignoring it, and because it's easy to generate propaganda about it and scare the average ninny out there into going along with them and viewing it as a nasty drug and the source of all evil in this country. I mean, it's just absurd. I mean, the government is not as stupid as we think. They're aware of these solutions, and they
Yeah.
choose to ignore them. And that is really what frightens me the most, is how the self-interest of the people who run these corporations and essentially really run the world at this point, their self-interest outweighs everything, even the survivability of the human race.
We've entered into another area now, which has to do with, by saying that these really are not stupid people, that there is some sort of game plan, there is some sort of agenda when we deal with people at the management level of government. What might that agenda be if we look at the social ramifications of the criminalization of what amounts to really a fairly innocuous pastime?
Well,
I mean-
certainly, compared to alcohol, it's very innocuous.
Well, yeah, I mean, people smoke a joint, sit around their living room and giggle about inane things. I mean, that's what happens. With alcohol, you get drunk, you beat someone up, you get in your car, you crash it. I mean, marijuana really pacifies people. And alcohol, I mean, if anything, alcohol ought to be the illegal one, and we tried that already. That didn't
Yeah,
work.
yeah.
I mean, yeah, like people smoke pot, get in their cars, and drive really, really slow.
Forget where they're going.
It's an old Cheech and Chong routine.
You know,
I'll go
well,
5 miles an hour so we don't get no one notices us.
Which is not to say that people should take any kind of drug and get behind the wheel. Which raises another interesting question about, I've had an occupation where I had to drive. I had no choice. I had to drive 200-300 miles overnight, and was tired and was going to be tired again and could not sleep. And so if I did not avail myself of those things which were available in truck stops and other places, I would drink coffee, which was available in truck stops.
There's
and other
another place.
And what can you say about that? What can you say about drinking coffee until you're cross-eyed and you still think things are jumping into the road?
Yeah, you're still flinching at the wheel, shaking and jerking the steering wheel all over the place. Yeah, well, it's a drug. It's a war on some drugs. And I think your point earlier that, well, what does this mean if there's a conscious plan here? I think that's something people need to think about. Where are we all going exactly? Who is driving this vehicle called planet Earth, and where is it going?
And what are they stoned on?
What are they taking? Perhaps they want to keep it all for themselves.
Well, lithium, let's get real. What were the drugs that President Reagan was taking? You mentioned people with their heads up their rear. It's my theory that President Reagan's colonic cancer was cured at its early stages because of early detection. He just kind of like had to just look around and saw it right there in front of his nose.
Can you say that on the radio?
I did.
Sure.
Oh.
And none of us have. Well, I'm trying to think of what did I had some coffee today.
I don't think I had any chocolate.
Oh, and I had chocolate. I had some chocolate.
I had coffee.
Yeah?
Well, yeah,
there you go.
It's a daily
I'm
thing
going to
for
have
me.
alcohol when I leave here. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to a bar, and I'm going to drink.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
that's what I'm going to do.
Okay,
A
well,
woman
as
with
long
a
as we're
plan.
talking like that, I am a stone serious alcoholic. I was a moderate binge drinker. I never went on more than 2 binges
Per day?
a day. Yeah.
Good for you.
And so I've got 11 years since I've had a drink, and I really don't do anything but smoke cigars and drink coffee and chocolate, and I suppose I could start thinking about other sorts of stuff like
Things
sugar.
to do?
Sugar? Yeah, I think sugar is definitely a drug.
So what do we do now?
Well, I guess what we've really done is we've reached that rare point where instead of all disagreeing with each other, we really basically agree, because this is one of those times when we're dealing with stuff that's so absolutely and absurdly stupid, but there's nothing else to say that, first of all, locking people up for what amount to victimless crimes is absolutely absurd, that the idea of passing up hemp as a viable agricultural crop is also absurd, that there needs to be some sort of clear understanding of what is and what ain't a drug, and do people in fact have a right to ingest whatever they want to ingest?
What about drugs like television? I mean, isn't TV a drug?
That's the one we got to control.
Actually,
TV a
yeah,
drug?
if we're talking about behavior, yeah, and isn't there that kind of research that says that the light strobing at whatever the light on the TV tube strobes at, that creates a certain response in the pleasure center of the brain?
And what about all the pesticides we ingest? I mean, all the DDT and everything else that's in the non-organically grown vegetables and fruits that we eat. Are those not drugs? They cause cancer. They're drugs, aren't they? I mean, I think they're drugs. They're
They
chemical.
should definitely be controlled.
Yeah.
Well, apparently the way the law works is that it's only a drug if it's something that you enjoy so much that you're willing to pay money to do it again.
You want to get the DDT off your apples, they're going to get pissed off. They're going to say you can't do that. If you malign a fruit or a vegetable in this state, you're likely to get sued. But hey, don't grow hemp and don't smoke it.
Well, the thing I want to touch on before we leave is, do you guys think that the tide is turning? Yeah, I think I'm seeing more and more people talking about this issue. So
They're
I'm thinking that
talking
things
about
are
it,
moving in a positive direction.
Well, you have a generation of stoners who are starting to grow up, I mean, there's Willie in the White House.
Straighten up.
And so they're straightening up, and see, they remember sitting around and listening to Frank Zappa or whatever and being so stoned that the most they could do really is wiggle their toes. And they know that it didn't hurt them.
I mean, what a
Right.
crazy drug it is anyway. What a crazy experience. Like do something and see how stupid you can get. Can you be that stupid and survive?
I guess if you do it in your living room. Oh, there's that music again. Where's that coming from?
You know what? It sounds to me like Spike Jones has been smoking the stuff himself. Folks, we'll see you next week. This has been Antithesis. Let's give a big round of applause to our guest, the managing editor of the Colorado Daily,
Thanks,
Pamela
guys.
White.
Thanks for joining us.
Well, Richard, I
We guess we agree on this one.
would like to have disagreed with you.
Not this time. Sorry.
All right. We'll see you folks next Sunday at 5:30.
On KGNU, Boulder.